Welcome to another Ask Me session, where I answer your questions about strategy, operations, data, and evaluation for nonprofits, foundations, public agencies, and other organizations providing education, human, and social services. I'm Tamara, your sidekick, here to help you make a bigger impact with less sacrifice. We have one question today from Kathy. She asks, what are some new ways that I can collect data about my program and outcomes? Now, this is a big question, so I'm saving the whole session just for this question. There are so many ways to collect data. There are some ways that you've probably heard of before, and then there's a whole bunch of other ways that are just starting to emerge or maybe aren't as common. So I'm going to run through a whole bunch, but know that it's still not everything. So first, you're probably familiar with online and paper surveys. So these are questionnaires that you put a bunch of questions, and whether it's quantitative with numbers or qualitative, where you're asking open-ended questions that people respond with words, those questionnaires are distributed either online or in paper, and people respond to them. You also could be collecting data using mobile phones. And so this is not quite the same as the online survey. You could have online surveys accessible on mobile where people would open up a browser. But you also could have QR code promotion where people can scan a QR code in order to open up the web page on a mobile phone. Now, this requires an extra app, and so it isn't always effective. Like, people don't always respond, but it is possible for some populations. You also could do text message surveys where you actually text them questions and they text back. This would work if you were in the United States, but outside of the United States, people don't use SMS or texting as often. They're usually using a messaging app like WhatsApp or Telegram. And so you could use Telegram or WhatsApp or the application in order to deliver and have the survey as well. Just you would have to make sure that people actually were on that application and you had access to them through that application. Another way to use computers is actually through computer-assisted interviewing. So you're probably familiar with the idea of doing an in-person interview or even a virtual interview where you're on Zoom or Teams or one of the online meeting settings, and you sit there and you ask people the questions. Now, you could actually do this also using a computer-assisted interviewing technique. So there's computer-aided personal interviewing and there's computer-aided telephone interviewing. And what this is that the computer actually tells you what to ask next, and based on what you select in their response in the interview, it tells you what the next question is. So it can have really complex skip logic and different flows of questions so that the facilitator of the interview doesn't have to know exactly what would have to happen if they have a particular answer. The computer tells them. So this can be very expensive because you have to have this computer system set up, but it can be really helpful if you're doing really large-scale survey collection with a complicated survey that has lots of skip logic. Another option is interactive voice response, and this is where you have a phone system maybe that automatically calls different numbers, and it's actually a computer voice where it's recordings that ask the questions, and then the respondent can use the dial pad or use speech recognition with their verbal response in order to get their answers. So this doesn't involve humans in the data collection, but it means you can reach a whole lot of people with these surveys. But you probably have experienced these before where you've gotten a random phone call and it sounds like a bot. So you have to be careful as to who will actually respond if people are aware that it's coming and willing to participate. You also can collect data through polls on social media or polls during your Zoom or online meeting or polls at events. And so polls are really quick ways to get information on very few things. So maybe one or two things, and for everybody or a huge group of people at the same time. So you can set up your polls in advance in your online meetings. So if you have a large gathering, like a community forum online, or you have a meeting of partners, you can set up a poll and record those responses so that actually can be included in your data. You also could even use it on a one-to-one version. So if maybe you're serving people one-to-one online, then you could have a poll just at the end where they could respond. You can't forget about in-person and virtual interviewing and focus groups. So these are all very fancy things, but know that interviewing in person or interviewing virtually and doing focus groups online or in person are still really effective methods of collecting a lot of really valuable data. You can hold community forums. So this would be like a town hall or a large community gathering where you get a bunch of people you invite them to discuss a particular topic, and you record specific information that you're interested in about learning from the community. For example, maybe common issues or things, strengths and weaknesses that they view in their community. So getting them in a group and having them talk about it, you can then qualitatively code what is coming out of those discussions. Another way to collect data is through testimonials and reactions. So this would be, you could ask for short blurbs where people went through your program, for example, and you ask them for just a 1-minute video or a 30-second video, or you ask them to write down what their experience was like. And you could have them say, for example, what they got out of the program, or you could do it sort of like the style you probably see like with movies after premieres, where they just catch people when they're leaving and they're like, hey, what did you think? And they just get a reaction. Those are really great ways to gauge what people are getting out of experiential programs. You could have a chat bot. So if you have something that is an online program or service, or if you're able to access your participants online or your community online, having a chat bot where this is like that pop-up that comes up and it says, hey, they want to talk to me. Those chatbots can be really useful because you can program them to ask particular questions and have specific response options. So it could be a specific survey, or it could be a poll, or it could just be a set like flows of different questions that you can collect on a regular basis. Journals and logs are great ways to keep data collection as well. So if people are going through your program, they can keep regular journals about what they're thinking, their experience, what's going on. If your staff could keep logs where they could actually reflect like what was done, what's next, what kind of things happened during the program, then you can get whichever kind of quantitative and qualitative data. They could provide tallies or counts. They could also provide written out responses about things that you want them to be reflecting on or reporting or observing every session. Observation is a really strong tool that can be expensive because it takes time, but it's really valuable. And so I don't actually see frequently enough people using observation to see how programs or how services are being experienced and what is changing because of it. So observations are definitely something to take a look at as whether you could add them to your repertoire. Social media, forum and social media groups are great places for you to collect data by listening. So if you're in these communities, first make sure you have consent and permission to use the information if it's a closed group, for example. But looking at hashtags and looking at what questions are coming out and what content is coming out of people in the group can actually tell you a lot about a population or a community. And there's so many people using social media, and there's a lot going on in public spaces in social media. So you can have a very rich data collection from those contexts. You also can use things that aren't as often thought of as data, but they are. Photos, videos, artwork, all of these you can take a before and after photo, and it can be a very convincing demonstration of change. You can take photos of context to show what's happening in environments. You could take videos of interactions, and there are strong demonstrations of what is and isn't happening and the context that things are occurring in. Artwork is an amazing aspect of self-expression where people could be demonstrating substantial growth or change or emotional experience during participation through the way that they create their art. And this could be, physical fine arts, or it could be musical. So, you can be really creative. People can express a lot through the arts that don't involve words and those that do involve words. You can use stories, so vignettes and storytelling simulations. A vignette is when you tell the story and you ask people, what would you do in that situation? A storytelling tool would be to actually have people write a story about something. So this can be really useful with students or children because they can write a story about what a kid might be experiencing, and it would tell you a lot about what their perspective and their feelings are on a topic. Simulations are when you actually set up mock things for people to go through and you see how they behave. So like mock interviews are how people use that in human resources. But you can set up simulations so that people can go through situations that, nothing too ethically dangerous, but normal situations to see how they would respond and react. Document review, there are so many publications and documents that come out of programs, out of systems, out of policy, there's just documents everywhere. People publish a lot of things. And so you can actually skim through those and extract data on what's happening, how well things are going, what the outcomes of things are. So that way you don't even have to redo things. It's really just extracting from documents that already are being created. You can do the same with secondary data. So a lot of the times other organizations collect a lot of data, and so using those large data sets like the US Census or state Department of Education data, et cetera, they can be really great sources that are very low cost because it's really just your time of finding them and compiling them into your format. Portfolio review is great for demonstrating growth and learning. So having people actually create portfolios of work to demonstrate their change skills over time. And this is something that's really commonly used in education, but outside of education, we don't use portfolios very often. So it's definitely a tool that's worth considering. Expert or peer reviews can be really great ways to assess change, assess knowledge, assess attitudes and skills. So having either panels or interviews with experts or peers in order to assess where people are at. Or you could use standardized tests or assessments where you are actually using a tool that's been developed and validated. It's known to measure the concept that you are expecting to change or measure, and use that tool. And those tend to have certification or more specific requirements for administration. So you just have to make sure that you're prepared and have the right people administering those tools so that you're doing it in an accurate way. And then a couple of the things that are sort of emerging, and they're more common in for-profit business, but less common in nonprofits or in public agencies, are GPS and web tracking. Now, there's a lot of data that comes from the activities of people through their technology. So when people are using technology either on their mobile phone or on their computer, there are cookies and different trackers that could be used so that you would know what type of activities people are engaging in. You also could use GPS tracking if, for example, you have consent. You had an application on their cell phone where that would collect their GPS data so that you could actually know what locations they started from, went to, how long they were traveling, how frequently they were traveling, etc. You may have seen examples of this type of data reported when we were talking about COVID-19. Some of the pandemic data that were shared were showing how much people were commuting to work or how much people were traveling within a given day was decreasing during the shelter in place, and what locations it didn't decrease as much as other places. That was all using GPS tracking data that was collected through your mobile phone. So, of course, there's pros and cons to all these different methods. There's ethics to consider. There's also just capacity of cost and skill required. But these are just some of the many, many, many different types of ways to collect data. And so really it's about experimenting and kind of figuring out like what really matches the outcomes that you're trying to measure and the capacity and context that you have in your organization. So that's it for now. I'll be here every Monday. Submit your questions in the form below this video. or above it if you're in social media, and I'll answer them each week. If you like this video, make sure to hit like, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you want to see these videos every week. See you next time.